Well, the Bible is very relative to everyday life today. There's nothing that hurts me any worse than for people to say that, you know, we're living in a new age, and so the Bible is not relative today. The Bible says plainly that God does not change. He is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Now, our culture changes, and so we always say, we can change our packaging, but you cannot change your message or your morals. That's just a lie from the pit of hell. God says you're valuable, you're precious, He loves you, He's got a good plan for your life. He created you uniquely in your mother's womb.
The tragedy of Joyce Meyer didn't just begin in her childhood. It didn't end with her rise to fame. And it certainly hasn't stayed buried in the past. Because just when people thought they understood her story, it took another turn. One that made everything feel heavier, darker, and far more complicated than anyone expected. This isn't just about what happened to her. It's about what happened around her. The choices, the consequences, and the moments that forced even her biggest supporters to stop and question everything. Long before the cameras, the books, and the global audience, there was a young girl living in a house where fear was constant and silence was survival. Her father returned from war a changed man, and the home that should have been safe became the place she feared the most. What happened behind those walls stayed hidden for years, not because it was small, but because it was too painful to speak out loud. She learned early that telling the truth didn't always lead to protection. Sometimes it led to more pain, and that belief shaped everything that came after. As she grew older, the damage didn't disappear. It followed her into adulthood, into relationships, and into decisions that would later become part of the story people rarely talk about. When someone spends years being controlled and manipulated, it changes how they see love, how they see trust, and how they respond to pressure. So when she finally tried to escape her past, she didn't run into freedom. She ran into another situation that mirrored the chaos she was trying to leave behind. Her first marriage was supposed to be a new beginning, but it quickly turned into another chapter of instability, lies, and emotional strain. She wasn't just dealing with a difficult partner. She was dealing with the weight of everything she had never healed from. And that combination led her into situations she later admitted she never thought she would be part of. Influenced by fear, loyalty, and confusion, she crossed moral lines that stayed with her long after the marriage ended. And even though she eventually made things right, the impact of those choices never fully disappeared. When that relationship finally broke apart, it left her in a place that felt empty and directionless. The kind of place where people don't always make the best decisions, not because they don't know better, but because they don't know how to cope. She tried to fill that void in ways that only deepened the struggle, searching for peace in temporary distractions, while the real issues remained untouched beneath the surface. But then came a turning point. Not a perfect moment, not a sudden transformation, but the beginning of something different. Met someone who didn't reflect the chaos she was used to. Someone steady, patient, and consistent. And that difference forced her to confront parts of herself she had been avoiding for years. The relationship wasn't easy. She brought anger, pain, and control into it. And for a while, it seemed like history might repeat itself. But instead of walking away or escalating the situation, her partner remained grounded. And that stability became something she couldn't ignore. That moment of realization changed everything. Because for the first time, she saw that her past didn't just hurt her. It was shaping how she treated others. And if she didn't face it, she risked losing the one thing she had finally found. That fear became motivation. And slowly she began the process of change. Not overnight, not perfectly, but enough to shift the direction of her life. From there, the public story begins, the one most people recognize, the rise of a woman who spoke openly about struggle, pain, and faith. Her message connected with people because it didn't feel distant or unreachable. It felt real. She talked about everyday problems, emotional battles, and the kind of internal struggles people don't usually admit out loud. And that honesty became the foundation of her growing influence. What started as small gatherings turned into packed rooms. What began as simple teachings turned into broadcasts that reached far beyond her local community. Radio came first, then television, and with each step, Her audience grew larger and more diverse, until her message was no longer confined to one place. It was everywhere, reaching millions of people who saw in her story a reflection of their own struggles. But with that kind of growth comes attention, and with attention comes scrutiny. People started looking closer, not just at what she said, but at how she lived. Questions began to surface about money, about lifestyle, about whether the success of the ministry was crossing into something else entirely. Critics pointed to expensive homes, private travel, and high-end spending, asking whether it aligned with the message being preached. For some, these concerns were enough to create doubt. For others, they were dismissed as attacks. But regardless of where people stood, the conversation was growing louder, and it wasn't going away. And as those questions continued, another layer of controversy began to take shape, this time not just about finances, but about the teachings themselves. Some of the messages she shared about faith and success didn't sit well with everyone, especially the idea that belief could directly influence outcomes like health, wealth, or personal tragedy. Many felt this placed too much responsibility on individuals for things beyond their control, and over time, that criticism grew into a broader debate. What was being taught, and whether it reflected the core of what people believed faith should represent. Then something unexpected happened. She acknowledged it. Not completely, not in a way that erased the past, but enough to signal a shift. She admitted that some of her earlier teachings had been out of balance, that the way she once presented certain ideas wasn't entirely right. And that moment caught people off guard, because it's rare for someone in her position to publicly admit something like that. For some, it was a sign of growth. For others, it raised even more questions. Because if those teachings had influenced millions, what did that mean for the people who followed them? And how much responsibility comes with that kind of impact? The conversation didn't end. It evolved, becoming more complex and more difficult to ignore. But the tragedy surrounding her story didn't stop with personal struggles or public criticism. It extended into events that no one could have predicted. Moments that shook not just her ministry, but the people connected to it. One of the most disturbing involved someone within her organization, a person trusted to protect others, who instead became the center of a devastating crime. When the truth came out, it shocked everyone. A case involving betrayal, violence, and loss that raised serious questions about what had been known and whether anything could have been done to prevent it. While the legal system ultimately made its decision, the emotional weight of that situation lingered, leaving behind doubts that were never fully resolved. And just when it seemed like the storm might settle, another controversy emerged, this time connected to a broader network, one that had been associated with her work for years. Allegations surfaced involving abuse, cover-ups, and misconduct, forcing a decision that couldn't be avoided. Stepping away meant taking a stand, but it also meant acknowledging that something deeply wrong may have been happening within a space people trusted. That decision added yet another layer to an already complicated story, because it showed that even after decades of experience, influence, and growth, the challenges hadn't disappeared. They had simply changed form, and now they were unfolding in a way that brought everything back into the spotlight. What makes this story so difficult isn't just the individual moments, it's how they connect. The way early trauma led to later choices, the way success brought both impact and criticism, the way influence created responsibility that extended far beyond one person's life. It's a chain of events that doesn't have a simple explanation or an easy conclusion. Because at its core, this isn't just about one woman. What happens when someone rises from a painful past to a position of global influence, and the pressure that comes with it? It's about the expectations people place on leaders, the standards they're held to, and the reality that no matter how powerful someone becomes, they are still shaped by where they came from. And now, as more of her story continues to surface, people are left with a question that doesn't have a clear answer. How do you separate the message from the messenger? How do you reconcile the good that's been done with the mistakes that have been admitted and the controversies that still surround everything? The tragedy of Joyce Meyer isn't just that she suffered or that she succeeded. It's that her story exists in both spaces at the same time. And the more you look at it, the harder it becomes to define in simple terms, because every answer seems to lead to another question, and every revelation adds another layer to a story that still isn't fully understood.